Admiral Tharnas of the Vorkath Dominion, had commanded the first expeditionary fleet for 42 cycles. He had subjugated 15 worlds. He had personally overseen the surrender of 3 species. He had never, in all his years of service, encountered a vessel that refused to announce itself. The object appeared on his sensor arrays, without warning, sliding out of a gravity well at the edge of the Proxima system like a stone emerging from still water. No energy signature preceded it, no distress beacon accompanied it, no transmission of any kind crossed the void to identify its origin or intent. Tharnas's tactical officer, a gaunt Vorkath named Zal, turned from his console with confusion etched across his angular features. Admiral, we have an anomaly, bearing 274. Mark 6, range 53,000 units. Classification unknown, thermal signature is minimal. Radiation output is below threshold for a vessel of any significant size. Tharnas rose from his command chair, his talons clicking against the polished metal of his deck. He moved to the primary viewing screen where the object resolved as a pinprick against the distant stars. His secondary heart, the one that pumped specialized blood through his warrior's frame, beat a steady rhythm of caution. Caution had kept him alive through 4 decades of warfare. Magnify. The image expanded, and Tharnas felt his primary heart stutter. The vessel was enormous. Its mass exceeded that of the Vengeance, his own flagship, by a factor of 3. Its hull was matte gray, devoid of lights or markings, absorbing the distant starlight like a wound in the fabric of space. No protrusions suggested weapon systems, no observation decks hinted at crew compartments. It was a smooth, featureless oval that seemed to have been carved from a single block of hardened stone. Are they transmitting? Tharnas asked. Negative, Admiral. No communication of any kind. Their emissions are passive, as if they're listening rather than speaking. Tharnas' mandibles tightened. This was not standard first contact protocol. Every species in the galactic compact had agreed to a universal greeting package, a series of mathematical equations and visual representations designed to establish basic communication. The fact that this vessel ignored those protocols suggested either ignorance or hostility. He decided to assume ignorance. It was the more charitable interpretation. Form an interception pattern. 12. Cruisers, standard encirclement. I want them contained until we determine their intent. The Vorkath fleet moved with practiced efficiency. Cruisers that had served in 100 engagements shifted position, their drives glowing blue as they accelerated to intercept. The unknown vessel maintained its trajectory, drifting through the system as if it had nowhere to be and no one to meet. Tharnas watched the encirclement complete, his cruisers forming a loose sphere around the intruder. Still no response, no course correction, no attempt to flee or fight. Open a channel. Broadcast on all standard frequencies. Use the compacts. Universal greeting. Zal's claws danced across his console. Signal pulsed outward, carrying the mathematical sequences that had served as the foundation of interstellar diplomacy for 2 centuries. Tharnas waited. The seconds stretched into minutes. The vessel responded, but not with a greeting. A single data packet arrived on the Vengeance's communication array. Its format was incompatible with any known compact system but the Vorkath's translation algorithms honed through contact with dozens of species managed to decode it. A star chart appeared on Tharn his screen. It showed the local cluster, the Orion arm spiral structure, the familiar position of the compact's home worlds. And then it zoomed in on a region Tharn had never visited, a system on the distant fringe marked with a single red icon that pulsed like a heartbeat. His translator identified the system's designation. Sol third planet Earth. Beneath the star chart, a counter appeared. 240000, 235959, 235958. Tharn stared at the countdown. His tactical officer turned to him, his expression now one of open alarm. Admiral, the vessel's energy signature is changing. Its power core is cycling to levels we've never recorded. If those readings are accurate. They're not accurate, Tharn interrupted. No vessel can generate that much power without radiating waste heat. Our sensors would have detected it. Admiral, our sensors are detecting it. The numbers are increasing. On Tharn his display, the countdown continued its inexorable descent. 23 hours remained, 23 hours, until whatever the unknown vessel had come to do. He made a decision born of instinct. Prepare a boarding party. I want to know what's inside that vessel before the counter reaches zero. His crew moved to comply, but Thanos couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a mistake. The vessel's silence was not ignorance, it was intentional. It was patient. It was the silence of something that had already decided what it was going to do and was simply waiting for the right moment to begin. He turned back to the viewing screen, where the matte gray hull hung against the backdrop of distant stars. Somewhere inside that vessel, something was watching him, something that had crossed the void to find him. The counter ticked lower. 23:42:17. Thanos ordered his boarding teams to launch. The boarding craft detached from the Vengeance's hull, 3 sleek vessels, carrying 40 Vorkoth warriors each. They approached the unknown ship in formation, their pilots executing maneuvers that had been drilled into them since their first day of service. Thanos watched from his command deck, his talons gripping the armrest of his chair so tightly that the metal began to deform. Admiral, we're receiving telemetry from the lead craft. They're preparing to dock at the vessel's equatorial seam. Tell them to proceed with caution. The boarding craft accelerated, their forward bays opening to reveal magnetic grapples designed to secure them to any solid surface. They made contact with the matte gray hull, and Thanos's tactical display showed the grapples engaging. Then the image flickered. Admiral, the boarding craft have lost power. All systems are offline. What happened? Unknown. There was a pulse of energy from the vessel's hull. It had bypassed their shields, disabled their electronics. They're adrift. Tharno's secondary heart began to race. Recall them immediately. His order was unnecessary. The boarding craft were already dead in the water, their crews trapped inside darkened compartments with no life support, no navigation, no way to return to the Vengeance. The unknown vessel's hull shimmered for a moment, and Tharnos watched in horror as the boarding craft were pulled toward its surface, not by any visible force, but by what appeared to be a localized Gravity well. They impacted the hull and were absorbed into it, their outlines vanishing as if the vessel had swallowed them whole. The bridge of the Vengeance fell silent. Tharnos had seen many terrible things in his 42 cycles of service. He had watched entire worlds burn. He had ordered orbital bombardments that killed millions, but he had never seen a vessel consume boarding craft like they were. Nothing more than specks of dust. All ships, he said, his voice steadier. Then he felt prepared to engage. I want that vessel disabled, target its propulsion systems and its communication array. Do not destroy it, I want it intact. The 12 cruisers that had surrounded the unknown vessel opened fire. Plasma cannons released torrents of superheated energy that screamed across the void and impacted the matte gray hull. Kinetic accelerators launched projectiles at velocities that could punch through a dreadnought's armor. Energy lances carved lines of destruction across the vessel's surface. None of it had any effect. The plasma dissipated against the hull, like water evaporating on a hot stone. The projectiles shattered into fragments that drifted harmlessly away. The energy lances left scorch marks that faded within seconds. Tharnos stared at his tactical display. Watching the weapons fire do nothing, it was impossible. No shield technology in the compact's arsenal could withstand that much punishment, but there was no shield. The impacts were hitting bare metal, and the metal simply refused to be damaged. The unknown vessel's hull opened. Not a breach, not an explosion. The hull simply parted, sections sliding aside to reveal a weapon mount that Tharnos had never seen before. It was a sphere of dark material, its surface covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow as he watched. Evasive maneuvers, he shouted. His ships tried to comply, but they were too slow. The sphere glowed with a dull orange light, and then a pulse of energy erupted outward. It didn't travel through space, it replaced space. The void between the unknown vessel and Tharnos's test cruisers folded in on itself, and then the pulse was everywhere at once. It washed over the cruisers, and their shields flickered, stuttered, and died. Hull plates cracked, power conduits overloaded. Crew screamed as their compartments lost atmosphere, and their emergency systems failed. 3 of the 12 cruisers exploded. The others drifted crippled. Tharnos watched the display, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just witnessed. In 11 seconds, the unknown vessel had neutralized a third of his encirclement. It had done so with a weapon that defied every principle of physics he understood. The vessel's hull opened in another location, and a second sphere emerged. Get us out of here, Thanos shouted. All ships retreat to the gravity well. Prepare for a jump too. The second sphere fired, but this time it was different. The pulse that emerged was not directed at his ships. It was directed at the space between them, and it created a distortion that rippled outward, disrupting their drives, preventing them from forming the gravitational field necessary for faster-than-light travel. They were trapped. Thanos bridge crew worked frantically to restore power, to reestablish communications, to find any way to escape, but the unknown vessel's weapon had done its work. The Vengeance was dead in the water, as helpless as the boarding craft it had sent to their doom. And then, for the first time, the vessel spoke. A channel opened on the Vengeance's communication array, bypassing every security protocol THANOS people had ever developed. A face appeared on the main screen, a human face, female, lines of age and stress etched across her features, a scar running from her left temple to her jaw, eyes that held no fear, no anger, only a cold certainty that made THANOS blood chill in his veins. She spoke in perfect VORKATH, her pronunciation flawless. Admiral THANOS of the 1st Expeditionary Fleet, I am Commander Helena Vance of the United Earth Ship Retribution. THANOS opened his mouth to respond, but she continued before he could form the words. 112 years ago, your ships entered a system you designated as Sector SCVNFOURNINER. You found a colony of 4,812 humans. You called them a primitive species and ordered their assimilation. When they resisted, you bombarded their settlements from orbit. You killed every man, woman, and child. You left nothing but ash and silence. Theranos' mind raced. Sector SCVNFOURNINER. He had never heard of it, but then again the compact had assimilated hundreds of worlds. Not all of them were memorable. We had been watching you for 90 years. Before you arrived, Vance continued. We recorded everything, every transmission, every orbital strike, every scream that made it through the atmosphere before the communications grid collapsed. We have it all. She paused, and for the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Grief. Theranos realized. Grief so deep and so old that it had calcified into something harder than diamond. 4,812 humans, she said, that is the debt you owe. We are here to collect. The screen went dark. Theranos stared at the empty display, his secondary heart pounding against his ribs. He turned to his tactical officer, who was staring at the sensor readings with an expression of absolute terror. Admiral Zal whispered, you need to see this. Theranos looked at the display. The unknown vessel was no longer alone. 9 more ships had emerged from the gravity well behind it. Each one was larger than the Retribution. Each one was armed with the same dark matter weapons. Each one was descending on his crippled fleet with the patient inevitability of a closing fist. The countdown on THARNOS quote test display continued its descent. 230548. The UES Retribution drifted through the debris field of the destroyed compact cruisers like a shark through bloodied water. Commander Helena Vance stood on her bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes fixed on the holographic display that showed the VORKATH flagship, the Vengeance, limping away from the engagement zone. Her bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency. Lieutenant M. A RLOW at Tactical was running damage assessments. Ensign Tours at Navigation was plotting a course that would keep the Retribution between the compact fleet and the gravity well they would need to escape. Commander Dax, her second in command and the architect of their strategic approach, stood at her side with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. You pushed them harder than we planned, Dax said, his voice low enough that only Vance could hear. They needed to see what we could do. They watched 3 cruisers explode and 9 more crippled. That's not a demonstration, Helena. That's a declaration of war. Vance allowed herself a thin smile. They declared war when they bombarded. New Horizon, we're just responding in kind. Dax shook his head. The compact doesn't know about New Horizon. They didn't know. It was a human colony. They didn't even know humans existed until we showed up. Today, they know now. That's my point. We could have negotiated. We could have explained. Instead, we arrived in a ship 3 times the size of their biggest dreadnought and started dismantling their fleet. You don't think that sends a message? Vance turned to face him, her eyes holding his. What message would you have preferred? A friendly greeting? Request for parley? They killed my sister Dax. They killed her students. They killed everyone she ever loved, and they did it because they didn't consider her life valuable enough to spare. Dax's expression softened. I'm not arguing with the mission. I'm arguing with the execution. The execution is the mission. We need them to understand not just what we can do, but what we will do. The only language they speak is force, and we need to be fluent. On the display, the Vengeance was making its way toward the gravity well. The other compact ships were attempting to form a defensive screen around it, their weapons trained on the human fleet. Vance's tactical officer, Lieutenant Marlowe, highlighted the formation on the hologram. Commander, the compact is mobilizing for a counterattack. They're pulling ships from across the system. Estimated arrival time 4 hours. Vance nodded. That fits our projections. They'll try to overwhelm us with numbers. Can we hold against a full fleet engagement? Dax asked. Vance considered the question. Her ships were superior to the compacts in every measurable way. Their weapons could phase through shields. Their armor could withstand plasma fire. Their drives could jump faster than anything the compact possessed, but numbers had their own kind of power. If the compact rallied enough ships, they could eventually wear down the human fleet through sheer attrition. We can hold, she said, but we might not survive. Is that acceptable? Vance looked at the holographic display, at the tiny representation of the Vengeance fleeing toward the gravity. Well, she thought about the colony of New Horizon, about the sister she had left behind when she joined Earth's nascent space program. She thought about the transmissions they had intercepted, the ones that showed the compact soldiers rounding up human children and marching them into processing centers. She thought about the silence that followed. Survival is acceptable, she said. Victory is preferable, but the compact needs to understand that we are not here to negotiate. We are here to collect. She turned to her communications officer. Open a channel to the compact fleet. The officer nodded, and Vance's face appeared on the screens of every compact ship in the system. She saw the Vorkoth admirals, the alien commanders, the bewildered soldiers who had never seen a human before. She addressed them in perfect Vorkoth, the language she had studied for 40 years, the language of her sisters. Killers. This is Commander Helena Vance of the United Earth Ship Retribution. You have 1 hour to withdraw from this system and transmit our demands to your High Council. If you do not comply, we will consider your presence a hostile act. If you attack, we will respond in kind, and if you attempt to flee, we will hunt you down. She paused, letting the words sink in. We have been watching you for 90 years. We know your strategies. We know your Weaknesses, we know the names of every officer who participated in the bombardment of New Horizon. We know where your leadership meets, where your families live, where you keep your archives. We know everything. Her voice dropped, becoming softer but somehow more threatening. The only thing we don't know is whether you will choose to survive or choose to die. That decision is yours, but you have 1 hour to make it. She cut the channel. The bridge of the retribution fell. Silent, Vance's crew watched her with expressions that ranged from admiration to unease. She understood their unease. She had just threatened to destroy an entire species. She had made herself the arbiter of their survival. It was a terrible weight to bear. But someone had to bear it. Someone had to be the one who spoke for the dead. "Commander," Lieutenant Marlowe said, "the Compact's lead ship is opening a channel. It's Admiral Tharnos." Vance nodded. "Put him through." Tharnos' face appeared on the holographic display. The Vorkoth Admiral looked older than he had in the intelligence files, his angular features drawn tight with stress. His mandibles twitched as he spoke. "Commander Vance, you have made your intentions clear, but I must ask you to reconsider. The Compact is a coalition of 7 species. We have thousands of ships, millions of soldiers. You cannot defeat us alone." "We don't have to defeat you," Vance said. "We just have to make you hurt. And we have already demonstrated that we can do that." Tharnos' eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" "Revenge, justice, those are concepts we understand, but they are not practical. We cannot undo what was done at New Horizon. We cannot bring back your dead." "No," Vance agreed. "You can't, but you can pay for them. You can acknowledge what you did. You can make reparations. You can expose the officers who gave the orders and the soldiers who carried them out. You can make sure this never happens again." Tharnos was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Those terms will not be acceptable to the High Council. Then the High Council will die." The words hung in the air between them. Vance saw Tharnos' mandible twitch again, saw the fear his eyes despite his efforts to hide it. "What are you?" he asked. "What species produces beings like you, beings who would cross the void to avenge a colony that died over a century ago, beings who would build an entire fleet just for revenge?" Vance looked at the holographic display. At the Vorta Admiral who had killed thousands of humans without even knowing they were human. She thought about the sister she had lost, about the children who had been her students, about the planet that had been her home. "We are not what you think we are," Vance said. "We are not conquerors. We are not crusaders. We are not even soldiers, not really. We are just people who were wronged and who decided that we would not let that wrong go unanswered. We are the ones who remember. We are the ones who never forget. We are the ones who will hunt you to the ends of the universe if that's what it takes to get justice." She leaned closer to the camera. "And we have only just begun." She cut the channel. On the holographic display, the Compact fleet was beginning to move. Some ships were forming up for an attack. Others were attempting to flee. The humans watched them with cold, calculating eyes. The countdown had reached 58 minutes. The Compact fleet attacked at 53 minutes. They came in waves, their ships emerging from the gravity well in coordinated formations that had been designed to overwhelm any single defensive position. Plasma cannons fired in alternating patterns, creating a lattice of energy that should have been impossible to penetrate. Kinetic accelerators launched volleys of projectiles that filled the void with deadly shrapnel. Energy lances carved lines of destruction that could bisect a dreadnought. The human fleet responded with an efficiency that bordered on prescience. The Retribution's weapons were not like anything the Compact had encountered. They didn't fire projectiles or beams. They fired concepts, mathematical abstractions that translated into physical reality. A pulse of energy that didn't travel through space but rather collapsed the space between its origin and target. Projectile that didn't exist until it arrived, making shield technology irrelevant. A weapon that targeted the consciousness of the enemy crew, filling their minds with noise and confusion that rendered them helpless. The battle lasted 11 minutes, during which the Compact lost 43 ships. The humans lost none. Vance watched the carnage from her bridge, her face expressionless. Around her crew worked with mechanical precision, their fingers dancing across consoles as they directed the destruction of an alien fleet. The Retribution's hull vibrated with the impact of weapons fire that couldn't penetrate its armor, and the screams of dying aliens echoed through the communication channels they had left open. "Commander," Lieutenant Marlowe said, "the Compact flagship is attempting to retreat. They're heading for the gravity well. Intercept them." "Yes, Commander." The Retribution's drive hummed with power, and the ship accelerated in a way that should have been impossible. It didn't use normal propulsion. It used a gravitational manipulation field that allowed it to choose its destination and arrive there without crossing the intervening space. It appeared directly in front of the Vengeance, its hull blocking the path to the gravity well. Vance opened a channel to THARNOS. "Flagship. Admiral, you have no escape. Your fleet is destroyed. Your weapons are useless. You are surrounded." THARNOS. Face appeared on the holographic display, his expression one of pure terror. "What do you want from us? What do you want me to do?" "Surrender," Vance said. "Order your remaining ships to stand down. Accept our demands. Acknowledge your crimes. You'll kill us regardless." "No," Vance said. "We are not you. We don't kill surrendering enemies. We don't execute prisoners. We are not the ones who bombard civilian settlements from orbit." THARNOS stared at her for a long moment. Then his shoulders sagged and he gave the order. The remaining Compact ships powered down their weapons. They cut their engines. They opened their communication arrays and broadcast their surrender on every frequency. The human fleet formed a cordon around them, and the battle was over. Vance walked to the viewport of her bridge and looked out at the debris field. It stretched for thousands of kilometers, the shattered remains of 43 Compact ships drifting through the void. She had just killed thousands of beings. She had just destroyed a military force that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. She felt nothing. That was the part that surprised her. She had expected to feel something. Satisfaction maybe, or grief, or even guilt. Instead she felt empty, hollow. Like the revenge she had been carrying for so long had been a weight that she had grown accustomed to, and now that it was gone, she didn't know what to do with the space it had left behind. Commander Dax said, "We have a transmission from the Compact's High Council. They're asking for terms." Vance turned away from the viewport. "Patch them through." The face that appeared on the holographic display was not Vorkath. It was another species entirely, a tall, slender being with skin the color of burnished copper and eyes that glowed with a faint inner light. This was High Counselor Tequadalier, the leader of the Compact's ruling body. "Commander Vance," Tequadalier said, her voice carrying over the channel, "we have received your demands. We are prepared to discuss terms." "Discuss?" Vance asked. "There's nothing to discuss. We've given you our terms. You can accept them or not." Tequadalier's eyes flickered, and Vance wondered if she was seeing fear in the alien's expression. "Commander, you cannot expect us to simply capitulate. You are asking us to acknowledge crimes we didn't commit, to admit guilt for actions we didn't take. The bombing of New Horizon was done by a rogue faction of the Vorkath Dominion. It was not sanctioned by the Compact. Then you have nothing to fear from our demands. If your leadership is innocent, they will cooperate with our investigation. They will hand over the officers who gave the orders. They will help us find justice for the dead." Tequadalier was silent for a moment. Then she said, "And if we refuse, then we will show you what we showed your fleet today, but next time we won't be aiming at ships, we'll be aiming at worlds." The threat hung in the air between them. Vance saw Tequadalier quotes. Expression shift, saw the fear that she had been hiding finally break through. "Commander," Tequadalier said, "what you are asking for will tear the Compact apart. It will start a civil war. Millions will die." "Millions died at New Horizon," Vance said. 4,812 of them were human, and their deaths went unpunished for over a century. We have waited long enough. We have been patient long enough. Now we are done waiting." She leaned closer to the camera. "You have 2 hours to accept our terms. If you don't, the next ship we send will not be carrying a warning. It will be carrying a verdict." She cut the channel. The bridge fell silent. Vance's crew looked at her with expressions of awe and fear. She understood their fear. She had just threatened to destroy an entire civilization. She had just become the judge, jury, and executioner of trillions of beings. But someone had to be that person. Someone had to speak for the dead. Commander Dax said, "What do we do if they refuse?" Vance looked at the holographic display, at the image of the Compact's home world hanging in the distance. She thought about the sister she had lost, about the children who had been her students, about the planet that had been her home. "Then we make them understand," she said. "We make them understand what it feels like to lose everything. We make them understand what it feels like to be helpless. We make them understand that actions have consequences." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We make them understand that some debts cannot be paid. They can only be collected." The data archives aboard the Retribution were vast, filled with the collected knowledge of a species that had spent centuries preparing for a war it knew would come. The Compact had never known about humanity. They had dismissed the Sol system as a primitive backwater, too insignificant to merit their attention. But humanity had known about the Compact. They had been watching for nearly 100 years, recording every transmission, every orbital strike, every decision That led to the destruction of New Horizon. Vance walked through the archive, her footsteps echoing against the metal floors. The data walls glowed with information, the history of the compact, laid bare for her to see. She paused at a display that showed the bombardment of New Horizon. The footage was grainy, captured by satellite that had been orbiting the colony's moon. It showed the compact ships descending, their hulls gleaming in the light of the distant star. It showed the first plasma strikes, the fireballs that erupted from the surface of the planet, the smoke that rose to block out the sun. Vance watched the footage with an expression that betrayed nothing. She had seen it 1,000 times. She had memorized every frame, every second of the destruction that had consumed her sister's world. Commander. She turned to find Dax standing behind her, his expression somber. He had been with her for 20 years, had been her partner in the long years of planning, had been the one who helped her build the fleet that now hung in orbit around the compact's home world. Did you find what you were looking for? He asked. I found the truth, Vance said. That's what I was looking for. Dax walked over to stand beside her, looking at the footage. The compact didn't know, he said. They didn't know. New Horizon was a human colony. They thought it was just another primitive world, another species to assimilate. Does that matter? I don't know, does it? Vance was silent for a moment, then she said, I keep thinking about my sister, about the last message she sent before the bombs fell. She talked about her students, about how they had just finished building a model of the solar system. She was so proud of them, so hopeful for their future. She paused, her voice cracking slightly. Then the bombs fell and the compact didn't even know who they were killing. They didn't know that those children had names, had families, had dreams. They didn't know that those children were human. Dax put a hand on her shoulder. Helena, we have done what we set out to do. We have shown the compact what we can do. We have made them pay for what they did to New Horizon. We can stop now. We can go home. No, Vance said. We can't, because if we stop now, they'll rebuild. They'll adapt. They'll find a way to defeat our technology. And when they do, they'll come for Earth. They'll do to our home world what they did to New Horizon. And this time they will know who they're killing. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. We have to finish this. We have to make sure the compact can never threaten humanity again. We have to make them understand that what they did was wrong, and that there are consequences for their actions. Dax sighed. You're talking about genocide. I'm talking about justice. Those are the same thing sometimes, and you know it. Vance looked at the footage again. She saw the bombs falling, saw the fireballs consuming the surface of the planet, saw the smoke rising to block out the sun. She heard the screams of the dying, the cries of the children, the final message from her sister that had been cut off in mid-sentence. I know what I'm doing, she said. I've known for 40 years. I've had time to think about it, to consider the alternatives, to weigh the costs. And what conclusion did you come to? Vance turned to face him. Conclusion that some things are worth dying for, some things are worth killing for, and some things are worth burning entire worlds to protect. Dax stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, he said, if that's the path you've chosen, I'll walk it with you. But I want you to know that I don't believe we're doing the right thing. I believe we're doing the necessary thing. There's a difference. I know, Vance said. I've known that for 40 years, and I still believe that. Necessary is enough. She turned back to the data wall where the footage of New Horizon was now frozen on the face of a child, a girl, with dark hair and bright eyes who had been one of her sister's students. I don't think that's enough, Dax said. Not really, not for the people who are going to die if we do what you're planning. Vance reached out and touched the screen. She traced the outline of the child's face, remembering the message her sister had sent. These are my students, she had said. They're going to change the world. They never got the chance. The compact had taken that chance from them, and now Vance was going to take something from the compact. It was as simple as that. Commander, Lieutenant Marlowe's voice came over the intercom. We have a transmission from the Compact's High Council. They've accepted our terms. They're ready to surrender. Vance closed her eyes. She felt Dax's hand on her shoulder again, and she allowed herself a moment to feel the weight of what she had done. Patch it through, she said. She turned and walked back toward the bridge, leaving the data wall behind. The footage of New Horizon faded from the screen, but the image of the child remained burned into her memory. She had come so far, had done so much, but she knew that the hardest part was still to come. She had to make peace with what she had become. The Compact's High Council chamber was a vast space designed to accommodate representatives from all 7 member species. It had been built to inspire awe and respect, its walls lined with holographic displays showing the history of the Compact's achievements. It had never seen a human before. Vance walked through the chamber, her footsteps echoing against the polished stone floor. She was flanked by Dax and a squad of heavily armed soldiers there, weapons ready for any threat. The Compact's representatives watched her with expressions that ranged from fear to hatred. She stopped in the center of the chamber and looked up at the High Council. They were seated on a raised dais, their positions arranged according to their species rank within the Compact. Tila sat at the center, her eyes glowing with a faint inner light. Commander Vance, Tila said, we have accepted your terms. We are prepared to acknowledge our crimes and to make reparations for what was done at New Horizon. Vance nodded. That's a start, but we need more than words. We need action. We need the officers who gave the orders. We need the soldiers who carried them out. We need to see that justice is done. Tila was silent for a moment, then she said, and if we can't provide that, then you will face the consequences. The chamber fell silent. Vance could feel the tension in the air, the fear that radiated from the Compact's representatives. She knew what they were thinking. They were wondering if she was going to kill them all. She wasn't, but she wasn't going to tell them that. I want to show you something, she said, something that will help you understand why we are here, why we have come so far, why we will not stop until we have what we came for. She gestured to Dax, who activated a holographic display. The footage of New Horizon appeared in the center of the chamber, showing the Compact ships descending, the bombs falling, the fireballs consuming the surface of the planet. The council watched in silence. Some of them looked away, others stared with expressions of horror and guilt. This is what you did, Vance said. This is what your people did to a colony of innocents. These were not soldiers. These were not combatants. These were civilians, men, women, and children who had never hurt anyone, who had never threatened anyone, who had only wanted to live in peace. She paused, letting the images sink in. You killed them all. You didn't even know who they were. You didn't care. They were just another primitive species to assimilate, another obstacle to remove, another problem to solve. She looked at the council members, her eyes boring into theirs. We are not like you. We don't kill innocents. We don't bomb civilian settlements. We don't destroy entire worlds because they refuse to bow to our will. We came here because we had no other choice, because the only way to get justice for the dead was to take it ourselves. She stepped closer to the dais. We are not conquerors. We are not crusaders. We are just people who were wronged and who decided that we would not let that wrong go unanswered. We are the ones who remember. We are the ones who never forget. We are the ones who will hunt you to the ends of the universe if that's what it takes to get justice. The holographic display showed the final moments of New Horizon, the last screams of the dying, the silence that followed. Vance watched it without flinching. Your High Council has accepted our terms, she said, but I want to hear it from your own mouths. I want to hear you acknowledge what you did. I want to hear you admit that you were wrong. She looked at Tiller. Speak, she said. Tiller rose from her seat. Her eyes glowed brighter than before, and her voice was steady. We acknowledge, she said. We admit we were wrong. The bombing of New Horizon was a crime against sapient life. It was a violation of every principle we claim to hold dear, and we are ashamed that it happened under our watch. She paused, her voice dropping. We will cooperate with your investigation. We will hand over the officers who gave the orders. We will help you find justice for the dead. Vance nodded. That's all we ask. That's all we've ever asked. She turned to leave, but then stopped. She looked back at the council, her eyes hard. One more thing, she said. We will be watching. We will be listening. We will be recording. If you ever do anything like this again, we will return, and we will not be so merciful next time. She walked out of the chamber, her footsteps echoing against the stone floor. She didn't look back. The Compact's counteroffensive began at 0 hour, exactly as Vance had predicted. They came with everything they had, 800 ships drawn from 7 systems, converging on the human fleet's position. They came with weapons that had been designed specifically to counter human technology. They came with desperation in their hearts and fear in their eyes. Vance watched them arrive on her tactical display, her expression impassive. How many? She asked. 843 ships, Commander, Lieutenant Marlowe said. They're forming up for a coordinated assault. I can see that. What about the ships? We've already disabled. They've been abandoned. The crews are evacuating. Vance nodded. That's good. It means they're not going to use those ships against us. They're going to use their fresh forces instead. She turned to Dax. How many ships do we have? 10, Dax said. 9 of them are fully operational. The 10th took heavy damage in the earlier engagement. 1 ship, Vance said. That's our margin for error. We knew this was coming, Dax said. We planned for it. We planned for it, but that doesn't Mean we can survive it. 800 ships, Dax. That's a lot. We have the Cascade. Vance looked at him. The Cascade is a last resort. It's not something we use lightly. I know, Dax said, but we might not have a choice. On the tactical display, the compact ships were forming up for their assault. They were taking positions around the human fleet, preparing to attack from all directions at once. It was a classic encirclement maneuver designed to overwhelm any single defensive position. Vance studied the formation, looking for weaknesses. She found several. Compact had rushed this attack, had gathered their forces too quickly, had left gaps in their lines that could be exploited, but even with those gaps the odds were heavily against them. All ships, she said, form a defensive line. I want the retribution at the center will be the bait. Dimitri, Dax said, that's a suicide mission. We don't have a choice. If we try to spread out, they'll pick us off one by one. We need to hold their attention while we find a way to break through, or while we activate the Cascade. Vance was silent for a moment, then she said, yes, that too. The compact fleet attacked. They came in waves, their ships firing plasma cannons, kinetic accelerators, energy lances. They came with a fury that should have overwhelmed the human fleet. They came with a confidence that numbers would prevail. They were wrong. The human fleet fought like demons. Their weapons phased through shields. Their armor withstood plasma fire. Their drives allowed them to dodge attacks that should have been unavoidable. They destroyed ship after ship, their kill count rising with every passing minute. But they were taking damage. Retribution's hull was scarred and blackened. The other ships were losing their protective coatings. The crew was exhausted, their reaction slowed by fatigue and adrenaline. Commander, Lieutenant Marlowe said, we're taking too much damage. We can't hold much longer. Vance looked at the tactical display. The compact ships were still coming, their numbers seemingly endless. She had destroyed 60 of them, but there were 783 left. It wasn't enough. They were going to be overwhelmed. Activate the Cascade, she said. Dax's eyes widened. Commander, do it. Dax turned to his console and began the activation sequence. The Retribution's core started to glow, a brilliant blue light that pulsed with an inner rhythm. The ship began to vibrate, its hull groaning under the strain. Commander, Lieutenant Marlowe said, compact ships are pulling back. They can see what we're doing. They know, Vance said. They know what happens when we power up our weapons. They've been monitoring our power signature. She watched the tactical display, her eyes focused on the compact's flagship. It was retreating, trying to get out of range. Too late, she said. The Cascade activated. A wave of energy erupted from the Retribution's core, spreading outward in all directions. It didn't destroy, it didn't burn, it rewrote. The energy wave bypassed every shield, every weapon, every defense. It reached the compact ships and disabled them, their systems fried, their power cores overloaded, their crews helpless. The wave reached the Vengeance, the compact's flagship, and it too fell. Silent. Vance watched the display, her expression unchanged. The Cascade had worked. It had neutralized the compact's counteroffensive, but at what cost? Commander, Dax said, the Cascade has disabled our systems as well. We're dead in the water. I know, Vance said. I expected that. She looked at the holographic display, where the compact ships were drifting. Crippled, she had just won the battle. She had just saved her fleet. But she knew that the real battle was still to come. The compact's leadership was still out. There, the officers who had ordered the bombing of New Horizon were still hiding, and she was not going to rest until they were brought to justice. All ships, she said, stand by. We have work to do. The compact's High Council surrendered unconditionally 3 days later. The representatives from all 7 member species signed a document that acknowledged their crimes and accepted their punishment. They handed over the officers who had ordered the bombing of New Horizon. They paid reparations in resources and technology. They ceded all territories within 50 light years of the colony. Vance watched the ceremony from the Retribution's bridge, her face expressionless. She felt nothing, not satisfaction, not triumph, not even relief. She had done what she set out to do. She had gotten justice for the dead, but it felt hollow. Commander Dax said, "The Compact's High Council is requesting a final meeting. They want to discuss future relations." Vance nodded. "I'll be there." She walked to the viewing port and looked out at the planet below. It was a beautiful world, green and blue, full of life. She thought about New Horizon, about the planet that had been her sister's home. It had been beautiful too before the compact came. She thought about her sister, about the last message she had sent before the bombs fell. She had been so proud of her students, so hopeful for their future. She had died hoping that someone would remember them. Vance remembered. She would always remember. Commander Dax said, "We have a problem." Vance turned to him. "What is it?" "The compact's officers have been handed over, but we've discovered something. Some of them are not who they claim to be. They've been hiding their true identities." "Who are they?" Dax looked at her, his expression grim. "They're war criminals. They've been hiding among the compact's population for decades. They were never meant to be handed over." Vance's eyes narrowed. "Where are they?" "We don't know. They've gone into hiding. But we have leads. They're hiding on a planet in the outer rim, a planet called..." He paused, reading from his console. "Epsilon Eridani." Vance nodded. She knew that planet. It was a compact colony, a world that had been settled by the Vorkaz Dominion. It was the perfect hiding place for war criminals. "Prepare the fleet," she said. "We're going to Epsilon Eridani." Dax hesitated. "Commander, we've already won. We've gotten justice for New Horizon. We don't need to go after the war criminals. They're not worth the effort." Vance looked at him, her eyes hard. "They're worth everything, every single one of them is worth everything." She turned to the viewport and looked out at the planet below. "We have only just begun," she said. "Hunt continues." She walked off the bridge, her footsteps echoing against the metal floor. She didn't look back. Behind her, the Retribution's engines began to cycle. The war was over, but the fight had just begun. The end.